Hi, everybody. I'll give you a minute to connect to sound. Hi, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 993rd New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Gregg Bordowitz, Pamela Sneed, and Jill Casid. And now I'll introduce today's guests and host. Gregg Bordowitz is a filmmaker, writer, activist, and teacher whose work has been exhibited at the Whitney Museum, the New Museum, Artist Space, among many others. In the 1980s, Bordowitz focused his creative practice on responding to the AIDS crisis. He organized and documented many protests against government inaction and advocated for health education and harm reduction as a member of the groundbreaking AIDS activist group ACT UP and an educator for GMHC. He also served as a founding member of the 1980s video film collectives Testing the Limits and Diva TV. Pamela Sneed is a New York-based poet, performer, and visual artist. She's the author of Imagine Being More Afraid of Freedom Than Slavery, Kong, and other works, Sweet Dreams, and Funeral Diva, which was featured in the New York Times and won the 2021 Lambda Lesbian Poetry Award. Sneed has published in the Paris Review, Frieze, and more. She's a professor at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, and she teaches across disciplines in Columbia University's MFA program. Her upcoming performance, a tribute to Big Mama Thornton, will be at Joe's Pub March 1st and 2nd, 2024, and there's only a few tickets left, so I encourage you to purchase a ticket if you can. And scholar and artist Jill H. Casid is professor of visual studies in the departments of art history and gender and women's studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Casid is currently completing Necro Landscaping, the first part of a two-book project on form at the edges of life. Casid is the author of Scenes of Projection, Recasting the Enlightenment Subject. Casid's artwork has been exhibited internationally and nationally, including in recent exhibitions at Signs and Symbols and the Ford Foundation Gallery. We are so lucky to have Jill as a contributor to the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jill.
So welcome, everyone. We have icons, comrades, beloveds, inspirations in the house. I am thrilled to be having this, frankly, dream conversation with Pamela Sneed and Gregg Bordowitz about healthcare, not warfare. I just want to quickly start us off by a personal acknowledgement as the descendant of Jewish refugees from Germany and what's now Belarus and Ukraine. My great-grandmother was taken on the first transport of Jews out of the Baden region to the Gors concentration camp in southern France. And as the descendant of dispossessed Jews, many of whom didn't survive, I refuse the weaponization of my grief and losses as fuel for the Israeli state's genocidal war machine, condemn the assaults on academic and journalistic freedom, and the double standards with regard to boycotts and sanctions. And in their names and my own, I'm with Palestine still in not just calling for ceasefire, but also naming to dismantle the genocidal apartheid regime of our time, and doing so as a praxis of love. I'm joining the Brooklyn Rails NSE and the Zoom room, where again, this is the realization of a dream to be in conversation with the forces that are Pamela Sneed and Gregg Bordowitz from what's the unceded occupied territory of the Ho-Chunk Nation. And of course, without material consideration of land back, the right of return, reparations, and abolition of the carceral state and colonial occupation. And as we will also be discussing today, the ways in which disaster capitalism refuses so many modes of necessary care. Acknowledgement is never enough. So let's hold that portal open and in getting our conversation started, we're excited to be cycling through images, really fabulous ones from the first part of this year-long unfolding project, Healthcare Not Warfare. These are from Healthcare Not Warfare, a tragic comedy, the Performa Biennial in November 17, 2023. This first episode of your collaboration, Gregg and Pamela, is, of course, at the intersections of art and health activism in ways that continue to shape your work and the viability of your lives, not just as you have put it so importantly, Gregg, since the not just since the AIDS epidemic began in the 80s, but as you remind us, the AIDS crisis is still beginning. So with that really important shift in our understanding of the temporality of crisis, I'd really love to have us begin with the ways that Gregg and Pamela, you in your collaboration confront the pivotal convergence of the HIV/AIDS crisis with what we could perhaps, following you, say are the still beginning crises of the pandemics of COVID-19, the increasing climate crises that include toxic racism and disaster capitalism, and the ways that you confront those with, in your inimitable and yet deeply inspiring ways, the powers of performance and especially hybrid performance and modes of collaboration to motivate and activate change. And that's a very wide platform as well as dance floor.
Gregg, do you want to go first?
You can go, Pamela.
Or
do you want me to go?
I'm still formulating my thoughts.
All right. Well, Pamela and I go way back and to the then called Lesbian Gay Community Center in New York on 13th Street. And we were in the same world, overlapping worlds. Pamela was a star that I was aware of and had heard read and also seen around. And we have many friends in common. And so, but we come out of that world of New York and our generation facing the HIV crisis at its worst in New York in the late 80s and 90s. And I think I won't speak for you, Pamela, but I'll say for me as a long time person living with HIV and an HIV activist, the COVID pandemic brought home a lot of realizations that the HIV activist movement had understood: the disparities among rich and poor, the disparities among white, black, and brown people, queer people who were receiving and not receiving healthcare, are not receiving healthcare, who's left out of the capitalist bargain on healthcare. The COVID was, for many people I know who have HIV, particularly the lockdown, was a reminder of a very familiar reminder of that acute moment in our lives. But ultimately, I ended up thinking about how the issues that tie HIV to COVID are, other than the psychological issues that I'm just really gesturing in the direction of, that the urgent issues have to do with the healthcare delivery, particularly when there was medications for COVID. The same set of issues arose that still make HIV an urgent issue, and that there's a great disparity among people all over the world around who gets access to the drugs that are keeping me alive, who gets access to the drugs that can cure or mitigate COVID. The same conversations around patents and distribution still exist. And that's one of the kernels, or one of a few kernels that are at the center of the Healthcare Not Warfare project. Healthcare Not Warfare is a chant that perhaps proceeds, but for me comes out of experiences working with and organizing within ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. I think that's just as urgent a claim and demand now than it has been ever in my lifetime. The last thing I'll say before I'll pass it over you to Pamela is that I think Pamela and I entered into a discussion about what can we do now, and we were thinking about what a peace movement that would organize itself around demands for healthcare would look like. Um, what would be the ways in which a healthcare movement, which could touch upon, like the AIDS activist movement, touch upon many, many different issues and provide a ground for association, coalition building. And I think that's kind of the underlying structure too of the way we organize the performances.
Um, well, I'm thinking about a lot of things. One, like I feel very strongly that that we need a healthcare movement like that our system doesn't work, that our system has failed us. I mean, I think, Black people have known that for a long time. But I think that, one of the things that happened, like, during the George Floyd uprising, was that people really started talking about, dismantling the police, and alternatives to policing. And I don't feel that we've turned that same kind of eye and scrutiny to the healthcare system, which I believe, commits atrocities kind of like on the daily. Um, and I always, say, like, if you need to go to the doctor, go. You know what I'm saying? If you need to, utilize that system. But I do feel that, like, now and in the long term, that system, as well as so many other systems within, this country, needs to be dismantled and reconfigured. So part of being part of this project is a call to that, is a commitment to that, and trying to also create a language around it, because I feel like, I mean, just recently they're starting to talk about, medical gaslighting, and so we're starting to get a language, but I want to push that language forward because I think that there's so much silence around the medical system and they get away with a lot. And certainly I feel like, and it's been well documented that Black women, or Black femme presenting people, basically have been mistreated in the healthcare system. So that's like one of my commitments, and really feeling like, with Gregg and I, we're talking about, a call to action. Um, and so wanting to kind of like spearhead some of that, to create a place, to create a language, to create like activism, to unite activism and performance, which has been done, for a long time. My activism, I think, was shaped, one, back in the day when I worked when I graduated college, and I worked at the Hedrick Martin Institute, and I was a program director, and so I was very aware of of the peers and the culture developing there, and then working with a lot of LGBTQIA people, and then also kind of like coming of age as a poet, and then like meeting all these really wonderful Black queer people, and them dying really rapidly from AIDS. And so that was something that like really transformed me, and that I never forgot. And I always was writing about it and talking about it, even before this period where people are starting to sort of like remember that period and all of that. But there was a period of silence, and again I wanted to work through that, I wanted to keep speaking people's names. And then, as Gregg brought up, the COVID pandemic, and what was it? The New York Times would say something like, shocking inequities in the healthcare system, and it's like, where have you been? You know what I mean? Or they say, this is like the first pandemic of our lifetime, or something like that. And it's like, what are you talking about? We lived through the AIDS pandemic. We're still living through it. So there was this real erasure. And then all of these wars going on, and I'm mortified about what's happening in Palestine, and trying to like really negotiate what my voice is too. Like I want to be on the front lines of talking about that, and calling for ceasefire. And but I guess at the Poetry Project, Malcolm Betts said something like, where's the ceasefire for niggers? And it's like, yeah, there's an acknowledgement that we've been under siege. I was talking to a young woman who's Mexican yesterday, whose family is like, undocumented. And, she was talking about like an endless occupation, right? And so that we don't treat like what's happening in Palestine as like, a one-off, but this is part of a continuum, of domination and apartheid and siege and all of these things, and in how we, stop it, dismantle it, how we continue to work on it. So these are like all of my commitments and my concerns, and bringing it to performance. And then also coming of age in like the late 80s and stuff. I came of age like where performance was really activist oriented, and every time I walked out of the theater, I walked out of a performance space, I felt like all this transformation. And I feel like it lost some of those priorities. And so one of the things that is a personal commitment, and I think Gregg and I have shared this, of like how performance can be activism, and like using like these theatrical spaces or these performance spaces to really voice concerns, or to really bring about social change.
Well, exquisitely put. I think one of the things that I would love to hear you speak to is the ways that performance in your work, yes, is activist, but also activist in a deeply coalitional, deeply transversal, deeply agential in creating bonds across movements and issues that have been held apart, or that are set up as somehow in the past, ways of, in an activist sense, carrying our dead with us, as Jose Esteban Munoz so beautifully put it, and insisting that some of the work that we might also need to be doing as activists is to refuse that erasure, but also some of the ways that you hold together what could be seen as not exactly opposed, but different positions. So, a demand to insist that there is access to drugs that sustain life or mitigate disease. Gregg, I remember as you put it, okay, revolution, but can I still get my meds? And what you're articulating, Pamela, in terms of insisting that we remember that the history and present of what's called the healthcare system, it can also be understood as a way to euphemize what is frankly often a tool of atrocity, to use your word, abuse, surveillance, various modes of carceral care that are really about using the police instead of any form of care work. So I that was a long-winded way to say that I'd love to hear you speak to healthcare, not warfare, as a movement call to action, even a revolution that can pull together in the strategies that you use what might seem to be distinct issues. And one could also understand that atomization as a strategy to prevent us from making linkages, let's say, between access to abortion and gender affirming care and trans affirming care, just to speak to the Viva Ruiz performance that's on the screen here. Would you speak to some of that ways that you're creating bonds?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, we came together and we were sort of like brainstorming, like we wanted to pick people who are working in performance and also working sort of like on the front lines and representing, various issues. And so, so Viva, so Morgan, so Ola, Kay, Kay Yolande Barrett, all people like, and Kay like runs the Asian Writers Workshop. I think, it was important, for Gregg and I to talk about people who were on the ground, sort of fighting in various realms, and to sort of like, bring as many as we could in this particular installation, together. And it was interesting, Ola like runs the Free Black Women's Library, and basically, I mean, is working in the communities, and I feel like that's really important. In terms of like, she's catering specifically to Black women and like, literacy and having access. I mean, a place to like sort of socialize, a place to dispense like information, a place to, sort of heal. And so, people were saying that like, with Ola speaking, it was kind of like a teach-in. So we were hearkening back to like, teach-ins, interventions, all sorts of things. And that was really a priority in terms of trying to like represent as many people, as many demographics as we could who are dealing. I mean, we wanted to talk about like, disability rights, the disability movement. Kay's been really strong in that. So yeah, it was just a priority to try and bring in as many people as we could who are addressing healthcare on so many different, fronts, but also who are like, anti-war, and that this kind of like information. I mean, a lot of people who came to the event said, I just really needed this. I just needed this place, to come and to have like, some of my views reflected. So yeah, I mean, this is what we wanted to do. And I mean, we're long-term activists, and we united for a common cause, with all of our differences.
Yeah, I can add to that and say I want to thank Kathy Noble and Defna Ayas, who were the curators of this section of Performa, and thanks to Rosalie Goldberg. We were invited to do something, and we showed up in a way that's kind of familiar to us. We also both come out of like the East Village performance scene, the poetry project. These are spaces, war spaces, our spaces. The space of performance is different than a protest. It is and is not a protest. It is and is not a variety show. It is and it is not a teaching. It is and is not a poetry reading. It can be all of these things. And I and Pamela, and I'm sure you, Jill, and others here go to many, many protests and hear many, many speakers try to conjugate shared concerns. In the performance space, there's a kind of capaciousness where one can play a little bit more with genre. One one allows for different kinds of affects and turns in affect. So, Miguel Gutierrez shows up and does a dance performance, the zombie dance. It was completely bizarre, but it fit really well with Diva and Ola, like everyone, it was kind of like channel switching in the old television sense. We don't watch television that way anymore, but it was really like a hard cut between different genres, and different uh, ways in which emotions and affect are enlisted, which is a very effective way of building strong bonds among people who are united around intersecting causes. And thanks to Performa and yeah, again, Kathy Noble and Defna Ayas for giving us the latitude and inviting us really to use the form. It was very intimate, and sometimes it felt like a political meeting. Other times it really felt like theater. Um, that's a very interesting question you can pose in the context of art or performance. Is like where does protest begin and end? Where does theater begin and end? Where does poetry begin and end? Actually, they don't begin and end. They're just overlapping streams of genre and modes of address. So sorry to go, I guess, way formal here, but I just wanted to talk about how the compositional thinking allows us to bring together and hopefully create the possibilities of envisioning a broader conjugation of concerns that really have the same the same causal are the results of the same inequities and causes, which are global racial capitalism. So that's what we were trying to do, but in a kind of great space that was a former jeans store on Broadway. I used to go buy jeans in that store, so it was a little bit of like New York archaeology here. It was like, for me, at times I was reminded of East Village, even though a lot of the performers that Pamela and I invited weren't around for the East Village performance scene in the 80s. Still, it had that same kind of flavor. A lot of my friends who were there, who were older, said it felt like that in a good way. So we were not only drawing on our histories as activists and poets, but also the kind of culture of socially concerned artwork, which can take many different forms and also can be productively emotionally confusing. I think art uh, allows us the possibility of producing mixed emotions. And that's another way of bringing people together is in an audience, in the context of something like Performa, you're given more latitude. People understand that there's going to be a push and a pull and a tug. Actually, you all don't have to speak the same language. You all don't have to have the same theoretical framework. You can abandon theoretical frameworks. Um, there's a kind of, there are many different layers upon which interpretation and feeling are being motivated at the same time. Of course, that's happening at a protest, and I go to protests. I'm not saying that this is better. I'm just saying that this allows for that the context of the performance allowed for um, a range of affects that are usually not foregrounded or rapidly conjugated as one can do in a theatrical context.
Right. And we also had a lot of improvisation. So we had set performances, and then and then there was a lot of improvisation too. So that was fun.
It was super
Well,
fun. And that's weird to say because we were talking about serious issues, but it's really great to be on stage with Pamela, and it's really great to be on stage with all these folks. And um, you know, it, it's really important, I think, during periods of dire struggle to be able to feel that love, that camaraderie, to be able to laugh at ourselves, and also to really encounter each other in the ways that we are together suffering.
Right. And to hold space, to hold space for some very difficult things that are going on in the world.
Well, that's a phrase, right? That holding space, that I remember the very first time I heard it, that I had only heard that in the context of doulaing. And when I, began to, so much of the work of what would an HIV doula do, around holding space as a way of, Pamela, you talked about people coming away saying, I needed this place or space, and that way of choreographing a occupation of what was a jean store. So, a kind of micro-capitalism, but also a spot that carries the residue of East Village performance, also becomes then a really exciting space within which to hold what we're taught can't we experience it, but somehow taught that that has to lead to some kind of even schizophrenic break, that if we are feeling overwhelming grief, confusion, attack, but also things strike us as hilarious, we experience moments of joy, how to craft the spaces in which we can have and do that together, feels like its own aspect of what a healthcare peace movement could not just look like, but do. So, that leads me to want to ask you yet more, and thank you so much, Gregg and Pamela, for helping us to also, thread that there is formal consideration here too, right? That socially concerned performance and art practice also requires exciting experimentation in form. And so I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about some of those tactics that you've already invoked, but maybe go a little bit further. So, how and why you're combining popular genres and common forms of assembly, and some of the particular strategies for combining affects and modes that are somehow supposed to be distinct, like tragedy and comedy.
I'm really into, in the context of art, I think one of the most radical things, I think the most radical thing that art can do is create audiences of people that didn't imagine themselves being in the same room. And so if one, this is the lesson of AIDS activist video for me, was that to conjugate many different communities and many different concerns based in real material conditions. For example, the unjustifiable funding, US funding for Israel's perpetration and perpetuation of genocide against the Palestinian people and the Gazans. That funding was made at the expense of cutting PEPFAR, which is a 20-year-old funding stream for equitable distribution of HIV medications. which is credited with saving millions and millions of people's lives. So what Congress is really doing, and when you say healthcare, not warfare, what we're responding to is a direct material condition of priorities that are set around defense funding, proxy wars, and at the expense of our well-being and care. The attack on trans people and the refusal to provide gender-affirming care growing throughout the country, these attacks, these refusals, they're related to the denial of choice to women, the enduring, continuing, perpetual lack of provision of care to the most vulnerable. So back to what you say, Jill, how do you talk about that within a kind of performance context? Well, first of all, one looks at the material conditions that are actually underlying the work, and then see how those underlying material conditions, i.e., the ways in which wealth are distributed, and show how we are all causally linked by the ways in which we are, in many different ways, intersecting, denied what should be basic rights, like right to care, and right to health access, right to medications. And so it follows from there, and actually some of the absurdity comes from that. I mean, it can be a pretty bleak psychological place from which this kind of ridiculousness can emerge. I use ridiculousness specifically because I'm specifically influenced by Charles Ludlam and the history of ridiculous theater and queer theater. That's something for the history books. I don't know if there's a lot of people out there. I'm seeing some names. I'm seeing people my age. I'm seeing people in the audience who know Charles Ludlam and who I'm talking about. The theater of the ridiculous was about very, very serious concerns, but it was done so with hilarity, with camp, with grace, with many of the lessons of what we know about the power of art and its ability to make people feel connected.
Yeah. I think like Gregg and I both work, in our own disciplines, like, I think between drama and comedy. I know that I do a lot of satire. And so, I mean, yeah, I think it's pretty important that we would work in that way and to leave space, for, people to laugh or to enjoy or to not just be, I mean, maybe it's a way to like sort of counter grief. Like I was thinking about, like, there were people who brought like signs, like protest signs, and were sitting in the front, that said, ceasefire and stuff like that. And I was really happy that they felt, comfortable to bring their signs, and that they felt represented. It was really important for me, I think, to basically think about people that I don't normally see in performance spaces. Like I really wanted like the program to address Black women. I wanted them to address Asian people, Asian trans people. Yeah, I feel like we're always dealing with so much invisibility. And I did come of age, in the East Village, and that was like really transformative for me. But I also feel like there's so many voices that we're missing, and so I think, in our thinking about this project, we were also thinking about voices that have been marginalized, and how can we sort of like bring them in. Like I really, it was really important for me that like a Black woman could come to that space and feel like something spoke to them, you know?
Well, I also feel like there's, not enough about the ways that, it's not always and even strictly about addressing. I mean, I'm finding it exhausting, the command and the bizarre structuring of issues as if the particular two-side-ism of that array of a binary that doesn't even begin to, best you both say, address the multitudes who are, marginalized, silenced, erased, targeted, harassed, and that one of the things that performance can do, and thank you, is to bring people into the room who may not always be together, but then also to frankly further encourage, inspire, motivate, enrich, and that overused word, but still a key one, to take back care as something that we can offer each other through performance, as also a mode of not just gathering, but electrifying each other, re-energizing each other. We're often made to, feel like what it is that we're witnessing, it isn't real, and that's its own mode of erosion. So I was also wanting to ask, if I might, about the ways that healthcare, not warfare, this call, this signal, has also pulled in not just various and sundry, but started to ramify differently since October 7. And I know that you conceived, healthcare, not warfare, long before October 7, and yet we could say that part of its power is the way that its call continues to issue forth a particular magnetism for how to not just call for ceasefire, and ceasefires in the plural, as you so importantly brought in, Pamela, that the proxy, there are multiple proxy wars, multiple fronts, including the longstanding way that white supremacy in the US creates a violent climate of anti-Blackness, that this call is also a way to commit to durational work, right? So how to keep it going, and durational work for peace. So I was wondering if you could speak to the appeal of healthcare, not warfare. You could talk about ways it's been, for example, taken up by Jewish Voice for Peace, by most recently ACT UP, on the 33rd, anniversary of the Day of Desperation. But I'd also love to make space, before we open things to Q&A, to also talk about how you're continuing this project, how you see it shifting, building as you gather and move toward what I believe you're planning as the culmination this fall, 2024. So again, very broad dance floor, but
I think it was an important move on the part of organizers in JVP. I'm just a member, I'm not an organizer, but I am close with the organizers. Morgan Bassicus, among others, who was featured performer, is a very dedicated and important central figure in Jewish Voice for Peace in New York, and broader than that. It was a very important move and very meaningful to me as a AIDS activist that the connections are not just horizontal, they're also backwards and forwards in time. And so it was very important to me and to others to kind of frame the protests that GVP was organizing in relationship to a healthcare movement that was also queer identified, but not only. And a healthcare movement that talked about the disparities in the healthcare system in this country and healthcare delivery for a wide range of people disproportionately affected. And so I think that's very important. I think it's important to frame struggles within a larger historical continua. I think it's important to speak across generations, to enlist an intergenerational conversation. And I also think it's important to see that anti-war has many dimensions. It's not just anti, it's for. It's for greater distribution of access. It's for redistribution of wealth. Just to name two of many things that we were presenting at the event.
All right. Yeah, we haven't talked about the fall, and that's going to be our big culmination. So we'll see. It's still, it's still up in the air. I mean, I think the concern is to be as comprehensive as we can possibly be, and to also sort of like inspire this discussion, this place, this, pushback. Yeah, to inspire more, to get people, again, to provide language and to get people to work, in an ongoing way,
Yeah. I imagine that we'll be doing smaller events and we'll be working on our own work as well, which furthers our collaboration. Pamela has a very great performance. I've seen it before. I'm looking forward to seeing this new iteration at Joe's Pub in March, show about Big Mama Thornton. Pamela, if you want to talk about it, I'm very excited about it. And I think it's not part of our project specifically, but we both have a lot of things going on in our individual practices. We both show up for each other as eyes on and audience members. I liked the smallness of the event, although it's not that small. There was, I don't know, 100, 150, 200 people. I didn't even know, but each other, Jill, you said for each other. I think that's really interesting because at a protest, we are there for each other to show our numbers, but we're also there to show our numbers for a presumed audience of lawmakers, other activists. The audience for a protest, and I thought a lot about this in terms of being an organizer, how you do press, how you create bullet points, how you speak to the media, speak through the media, not to the media. That's what we learned in training in ACT UP, and that's what we trained people to do. Speak through the media, not to the media. Here, there's something else going on. There's like it was a space where we all could be together and constitute ourselves as a we in an intimacy. And I think that's equally important. And I think movements need both and much more than that. It's not a polarity, right? Protest or art. Both are, no one is saying it is here. But I'm just amplifying that point that I'm really into the small event. We didn't even webcast that night. I like that it was just for the people who showed up in the room. Maybe that shows my generation. I'm not sure. I don't know. But, it felt really, people felt relieved. A lot of people had been out on the street protesting. A lot of people are, going through their daily lives, suffering. And we were addressing serious things, but we were also providing a space to be together. And I think, how can we be together is one of the most profound philosophical questions one can constantly ask and re-ask. How can we be together? Be, emphasis on the verb to be. And so I imagine, that we have a horizon of, a kind of variety show, a kind of grand union, if you will. But we also will be doing like much smaller events, and testing things out and bringing along different folks, and also bringing, back folks that we're working with.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like, there was something that happened, in the space that it did feel durational. Like it did feel like we're in here and it's funky and it's kind of cramped and we're going through and we're gonna go, through, like laughter. I mean, the tears, like the discomfort. We're just gonna, so we went over time and everything was kind of spilling over, and so that was also really powerful too, that that it kind of spilled, and that it did feel like we were going through something, together. um like with regard to Big Mama Thornton, I mean, I've been, now I'm doing music. And I mean, it's kind of funny because like I just feel like I'm at the age now, where I just want to do everything that I dream to do, you know what I mean? And I come out of the church and stuff like that. And then, it also, our event, I think, had a feeling of like church too, and yeah, and that like healthcare, the call for like healthcare, not warfare, is also like a spiritual call, and yeah, for a healing, for for kindness, for a lack of violence, anti-racism, anti-homophobia, transphobia, all those things, that is foundationally spiritual. um so anyway, and so I'm doing this work about Big Mama Thornton, and she was Black, like sort of like pioneered in terms of performance, in terms of music. I mean, we don't know specifically if she were gay, but she definitely was queer. And basically, like her work was like central to, American music, to rock and roll. And again, there's been this kind of erasure, in that, the white guys kind of like shaped themselves from the work of like Black people. And we always knew that, that American music had its roots in people of color and Black people, indigenous people. But now we're at a time where we can start talking about the queer Black roots of rock and roll. And so I mean, I guess a lot of my work is about like sort of like recovery, in the sense of, stories that have been erased, people that have been marginalized, and kind of like creating some kind of like making some sort of restorative act, some kind of commemoration. So there's a continuum in terms of the work that I've done in terms of like HIV, AIDS, and like all the friends that I lost, and in making sure that people know about them in this generation and their contribution. And so in that way, I'm taking this woman who, who's been marginalized, in some ways forgotten, and to basically, honor her. But I also feel like, it's a different brand of freedom music, and that's like, different generations have like used different mediums to articulate freedom. And I really feel like, she came out of the church. Her father was a preacher, mother sang spirituals. My grandfather was a Baptist preacher. And so, intrinsically, using theater, language, dance, all those things as expressions of freedom, as ways to kind of liberate, oneself. And so that's been really important to me. And so I'm continuing that work. And maybe in the next healthcare thing, Greg and I talked about possibly doing a song, so maybe I'll sing there. And then also I'm like working on a book called 929, and that I'll read an excerpt from in a while. But basically that's the amount of time that Derek Chauvin, sat on George Floyd's neck. And there's a lot about, the George Floyd uprising. There's a lot about the Capitol riots, and these people, like, particularly like the former, president, like, not being prosecuted for his role. And So it's about that, sort of meets the pandemic and then my parents' death. So like it's sort of like in every realm of my life, in my teaching, in my art, in my collaborations, it's always like dealing with issues of like freedom and liberation and you know, anti-violence, work.
Well, huge thanks for also allowing us to be part of the ways that I feel like we got a little bit of a window into how electric that durational conversation is between the two of you and your exciting and varied web of collaborators in posing, but also offering us ongoing answers to those difficult questions of how can we be and how can we be together, and I want to turn and make some space for Q&A. I also would ask that we understand that this is a space that we are also, and it's a delicate space of yes, getting uncomfortable together, but a space in which we're also holding each other and quite difficult work in unbelievably challenging times. And so I would ask those of you who are asking questions to pose them in the spirit of this gathering. And we, so that in case you came on a little bit late, what Pamela was referring to is that we will be closing with short readings from Gregg and closing out with a reading from Pamela Sneed's 929. So I did notice that there was a lovely question in the chat from I think Gabriel Chazen, and do we have?
I've got a few questions here from the audience, Jill.
Beautiful. Okay.
The first question is going to be from Elaine. Elaine, I'll pass you the mic so that you can ask. One moment.
All right. How does this work?
We can hear you, Elaine.
How does
Thank
this
you
work?
so much.
Hi. Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having this space today. I sort of happened upon it like 10 minutes before you guys started and was at the performance. And so I think I had like 2 questions that I dropped in the chat. I was curious to know how we can follow along with the programming for this year, like what's coming up and how we can support besides attending. But also with Performa, how are we, it was such an incredible evening, and I'm curious as to like how we can sustain the momentum that was built there and the conversations and the feelings and the togetherness, and how we can funnel that into action this year specifically. so that we don't, I don't know, I just felt that during COVID, there was all this talk about like, oh, we're going to forget about this feeling that we cultivated during COVID, for all these actions and for all these causes. And in a way, I guess I feel that we have forgotten now that we're at another election year, whatever
Oh,
that means.
Oh, oh no.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a whole bunch of stuff that's just freaking me out. Um, you know, and for all that I've been learning about insulin, like my partner is type 1 diabetic, and all the things that I know about like insulin between the US and Canada, me being Canadian and now going to make like runs to Canada to like buy insulin for the year. I'm was so taken by the evening that um, I'm looking for direction as to like how to come together and stay together and how to put that into action instead of just like feeling better together. I'm like, okay, so like, what do we do? You know, um, advice.
Well, I think that Greg and I talked about it didn't really make it into this particular iteration, but we talked about having like more audience participation in the next one in terms of people like really outlining like what their concerns are and like what yeah, what they need or um again, I guess I don't know if we were going to do a survey or something like that. So I think but to your question, I think we have to think about that. I don't think that we've established any, any set answers yet, but I think that that's something that's like on the table, and yeah, we have to figure it out. Yeah.
it's what we're doing right now. I really appreciate all your questions, Elaine, and I'm glad you were at the event. This is yet another event. This is another iteration. This is a way of bringing forward the concerns, talking about it formally. Very grateful to the Brooklyn Rail and to Jill for inviting us to do this. And so, I think the work takes many forms. Um, I worry about momentum, but I also frankly worry about for myself, but also for others, burnout. And I think also there's a lot of pull in many directions, but toward the street, which is good. And it's kind of impossible to forget. It's also impossible to constantly keep in mind. In some ways, that's a good thing. The body has an ability to kind of help itself out in terms of providing its own relief. So I don't know, I'm just uh, listening to my body and in conversation with Pamela, and this is another opportunity to think out loud together about what the iterations will be. And I just have faith that it'll go forward, it'll continue. And I hear you on the insulin. I'm diabetic too. HIV wasn't enough. I had to up my game and get another popular disease and make bad jokes about it, right? That's the formula. TMI in a blender. And so I appreciate your concerns, but you know, you will see the invites. The iterations will come, and momentum kind of has a way of carrying itself along. I
Thank you
hope
so
that
much.
addresses your question.
Elaine, that was a brilliant question. Thank you so much. And thank you, Greg and Pamela, for your replies. The next question is going to be from Michelle. Michelle, I'm going to give you the chance to unmute if you're still here.
Yeah, I am. I am here.
Michelle.
I don't know about the visual, but I'll just leave it. Hi. So my question to you, Greg, was that I somehow it had passed me by, probably in the effort to sort of maintain one's sanity. But I hadn't noticed this bit that you cited that I thought was really revealing about the Congress resolution to swap out healthcare and AIDS medications for some of these other programs that they're about to fund. And that's actually pretty predictable and shocking all at the same time. And the question is, where could I read more about that? How could I learn more about that? That was really special to hear.
That was kind of buried, but I just
Of course.
I'm not, I actually limit the amount of news I take in. I'm very informed. Don't think I'm not informed,
Oh,
but I actually have to kind of limit how much news. But that would just caught my eye, frankly, in the Washington Post. There was an article about it, how Congress was debating whether or not to completely cut PEPFAR, which was actually a Republican initiative. It happened under Bush, although it was a response to activist pressure from the movement. It shows us where we are at this historical juncture. So I just read this article, but it wasn't what the article didn't tie it to the war. It just said, the PEPFAR, and I see this, as a person who was also involved in needle exchange and was part of the effort to establish the Lower East Side Needle Exchange Program and to address the concerns of injection drug users in general around HIV. Why did I say that? Because I think it's very important to look at, it's because, this comes out repeatedly. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Every once in a while, like the Republicans and Democrats too, but, a lot of the Republicans, they're always just looking for excuses. Some of my dog is barking. They're always just looking for old things to bring up. So every once in a while, someone in Congress will bring up, hey, why are we funding needle exchange? Let's attack that. And then it's like the people are looking for, to help gender affirming care. This is, on the one hand, this has to do with blatant prejudice, disregard, and cruelty. On the other hand, it's very strategic. It's strategic and it keeps us on the defensive and constantly having to fight for things that we already achieved. I'll stop there because my dog's going nuts and I don't know if you can hear him.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that question. Did anyone else want to add to the reply before we move on to the next question? Pamela or Jill? Okay. Thank you, Michelle. I will ask Gabriel's question on their behalf because they're in a public space. Gabriel's question is, I'm interested in how performance spaces become prefigurative spaces for a better world in the view of Greg and Pamela and even Jill.
I mean, it's really like who the curators are. If there are curators, maybe it's like, I mean, in the 80s and in the 90s, there was still like a possibility, for performance. I mean, there is like a movement to kind of like decolonize performance spaces where people would just like, take over space. You know what I mean? And like, and we could afford to do that at that particular time. It wasn't, this city that cost like trillions of dollars. So, I mean, one thing that really impacted performance space and sort of like the democracy of it, I guess, if there ever was a thing, but the fact of all the rising costs, right? So, at one point, people could really like, just take over a space, and have a happening. Have an occurrence, right? And then that's really shifted. So, I mean, the spaces that, people take over now are more on the internet, right? So we're talking about like digital space, you know, and I don't know, you know, for a while, like I didn't feel. I mean, I worked as a solo performer for a really long time, and then I sort of like stopped because I felt like I was carrying a stage on my back going from like one place to another, and it was just like way too much to be my own manager, to be this, to be that, and then have to show up and do the performance. By the time I got to the performance, I was exhausted. You know what I mean? So, I think that there's no formula. I think that we have to continuously demand that of spaces. You know, I feel like we have to keep carving out our own spaces. You know, I think you know, and thinking about ways that we can, you know, shift performance and provide access, and you know, who gets to see what. You know, I saw something during, like, I guess like Under the Radar or whatever, and it was a really incredible performance, and then but like the majority of the audience was white and the performers were people of color, right? And it's just kind of like, well, you know, how can we bring in, you know, more people of color? How do we have access? So I don't think it's intrinsic to performance. I think that performance, you know, that there's so much possibility. And I feel like different times, you know, we've had more opportunity in terms of performance. But I do think like after, you know, after the first wave of the COVID pandemic, we've had like sort of like it feels like a renaissance or something in the arts, where there's just, you know, like people are in the galleries, like there's, it's exciting what's happening in the galleries, it's exciting, you know, what's happening like in terms of performance, it's exciting what's happening in literature, you know. So I feel like there are openings and that there are possibilities, but I feel like we have to keep demanding, you know, in any way that we see fit, you know, for these spaces to be open, and for, you know, performance to be to represent all the different, you know, issues and perspectives and everything that's out there.
I also wanted to respond just really fast with a uh, appreciation in one way for what the concept of prefigurative politics, this idea that we enact, I mean, performance is also everyday life, right? And there's a tremendous amount of, not just based in material reality, but one of the things that we've emphasized, I think, through this entire conversation is the way that, yes, we can talk about healthcare, not warfare, a tragic comedy as an event at the Performa Biennial, but we can also talk about it as an instance in a continuum of performance practices that are building and enacting what it is that is so often spoken about as something that eventually materializes at some point in a elsewhere and an elsewhen. And I think one of the really exciting and important aspects of the different temporalities invoked here, the sense of crises that are still beginning, insistence on bringing along those that we've lost, insistence on an emphasis on spirituality, which of course is also about energies that, you know, we supposedly don't exist because they're somehow not here. I worry about the pre in the prefigurative. I think that we're also post, and also mainly, I think what I especially emphasize is an insistence on the meanwhile. And I also want to go back to Gregg's appreciation for the small. I'm exhausted by many things, but certainly exhausted by this quantification insistence that until we get X numbers, that we can't also appreciate some of what it is that we've been doing and continue to do, and would, you know, also want to emphasize that one of the ways that we can wither what is actually happening is by a lens that would insist that it's not valuable until this elsewhere, elsewhen of when it's no longer pre, but supposedly figurative or figured. So I just an anxiety that I felt it important to share.
Wow. Thank you so, so much for those responses. And thank you, Gabriel, for that question. I'm gonna do one more question and then we'll move to the final part of today's program. But the last question today will be from GE. GE, feel free to unmute to ask.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Pamela. Can't wait for the Mama Thornton piece. No,
You come in?
Yes, I'll be on Amtrak. Yes, I will.
All right.
Do you see healthcare, not welfare, as a kind of joyful warrior act of triage in the way that it seeks to assess the causes and then kind of determine the urgency of the treatments we got to do?
Healthcare, not warfare.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a triage, but it's sort of like, well, I mean, it's like a loaded question. Like, we're not going to find out everything that we have to do, just in this like one event. But hopefully it's the beginning, of something, and or part of a continuum of demanding, better healthcare, of demanding, a ceasefire, of demanding, anti, racist and anti-homophobic and, anti like woman, I mean, so I don't know that like there's anything like pat and like sort of like prescriptive. I mean, I feel like I mean, some of it's a call to action, but some of it also is like experimental. Like we're gathering information, so we're putting out information, we're holding space, we're trying to create a call, but also we're learning a lot, and so how we treat some of these things, I think, is yet to be determined. Like right now, we're treating things through the performance, right? And that, and through the organization. Yeah, and I think that will, transform, and that some of the answers, if there's such a thing, is will be ongoing.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for that response. Greg and Jill, do you want to add anything before we move to the end of the program?
I appreciate the question, but I think Pamela really addressed it.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank everyone in the audience for those incredibly thoughtful questions, and would like to give an enormous thank you to Greg and to Pamela and to Jill for today's program and conversation, which was luminous and a pleasure to listen to. I understand, as Jill said, that Greg and Pamela are going to read to conclude today's program, so I'll pass the mics to them.
So we're okay. I'll go, and then Pamela's I'll go, and let me just find the poem on my being klutzy is part of my style if you know my work. Okay. So I'll just gonna read a short poem called Gone Missing. Welcome all carried away, restless lumps. There's a peace movement here summoning us. Can you feel it? Alliances among abject, scarred, scared, bloody, battered, bludgeoned. Fate drives chariots against family. Frozen battlefields, CGI effect. Still warriors ask, what are we doing here? Stunned, fast forward, inexorable. We here need medications, solace. bonding, salve, healing, microscopic tears, surface protein, cellular blockade, powerful biologic warfare, plasma, red theory, green experiential study, ladders away, plateaued geometries, no more triangulations, proxy wars, archival ain't gonna study war no more footage, our ancestors, our dead among metal into gold, our transmutations, hurl chunks onto arms manufacture, give up abused organ pieces. This piece is a violent secreting. This piece assembles no thing.
That's beautiful.
Thank you, Pamela.
I love that.
Thank you.
I'm going to read two pieces.
Yes.
929. Usually there's a poem on my tongue, not always ready to be written, but today marked the closing arguments at Derek Chauvin's trial, the cop who killed George Floyd, just days after cops shot and killed Dante Wright and Adam. Also, the violence against women in this country, cis and trans, is perpetual and unchallenged. Today, I decided to teach Audre Lorde's The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House to my students, really to consider our activism at this moment in time. I thought I could say something poetic. Instead, this shit's got me all fucked up inside, talking about freedom, survival, and wars on all fronts. I just want to cry. At the trial, the defense said George Floyd basically killed himself, died of his own causes, drugs, and so on. Each time they say this, they asphyxiate him and us again, force us to live and endure those elongated minutes, 929, over and over in slow motion each time. If one is fortunate, and I can't speak for everyone, but some may receive a gift, a talent, a lever to pull in cases of emergency, like the black box found in planes with instructions on how to survive. Some think someone that serves as a preserver, a raft in floodwaters. As many of you know, my lifeline has always been poetry. From the time I was 8 years old, I heard an infomercial for poetry by Maya Angelou in Still I Rise. It opened up the windows, made me know what is possible, which is why I can't disparage anything about Maya Angelou as some do, because she saved me. I always wanted to write a children's story about a hero called poetry, that in dire times we could speak and create her. As an aside, I often wonder about America's fascination with superheroes. Perhaps it's an alter ego, Jekyll and Hyde, that a country that on the regular commits atrocities could have its heart in children's stories and superheroes, a sign that it never grew up. And just so you know, I was offended by Black Panther being categorized as a drama at the Academy Awards, and the decision in New York to re-release it in theaters during Black History Month so that all Black children could see it. Just imagine if white history was shown once a year instead of year round. How would they feel if the movie about them was The Incredibles? I mean, I'm just saying. Anyway, it was education that led me out of the suburbs and sure fate for Black girls and women to Northeastern University I attended with Wendy Williams. And there again, I discovered through the African American Institute, poetry and theater. Still, it was writing and theater that led me to the New School, that led me to my first writing class with Jane Lazard. When I wrote about a girl, a Black girl that caused nothing but shame and pain, a Black girl so ugly her own mother would not accept her, cursed from birth until death, left to wage her own war on the world that cursed her, she knew it was me. She wrote at the bottom of my papers, "Yours is the best poetry and writing I've read in all of my years of teaching." Her words gave me, for the first time, gave me a sense of worth and purpose. And after I'd gotten heavily into drugs, one morning in a Lower East Side tenement, strung out, I decided to jump from the roof and kill myself. The only thing that I could think to live for was poetry. And I'm saying all of this to say, I've taken the long scenic route to tell you it was me, not a craft, that became my mother's hero. I was a champion from the early age of 9 during my father's beatings when she would instruct, call the police. Later, when over the holidays he gave her nothing, I stole from department stores to give her presents. And she would taunt my father, saying, my daughter will give me presents. And as an adult, I went there and sometimes stood between my father and she during their arguments. It was her words, get an education, that led me out of the suburbs into higher education. I was able to escape her fate. And I'm writing this now to say, despite all of my valiant efforts, I can no longer be my mother's hero. All of these years, even though high femme, I always had a sense of bravado that I could save anyone. It always showed up in my teaching with students. Anyone in a dark place, I would show up in my raft and I would toss them a preserver. Only now, the enemy is death. I see my mother descending, and I cannot pry open the jaws of fate where even poetry cannot intervene.
Wow. Pamela, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Gregg, thank you so, so much. Thank you both of you for today's dialogue and for those readings. Thank you as well, of course, to Jill for shaping today's dialogue with such care. And I would like to extend a thank you to Kathy and the team at Performa, who were so helpful in preparing for today's event and provided those photographs that you got to look at today while this conversation was happening. I'll thank the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor the NSE program and make daily conversations like this one possible. They also support our archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 23 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production, staff, and operations. You can support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free tomorrow at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with artist Delcy Morelos in conversation with Gabby Collins Fernandez on the occasion of El Abrazo at Dia Chelsea. The conversation will be in Spanish with simultaneous English translation. And as is tradition, you all can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for joining us today. And thank you again, Gregg, Pamela, and Jill.
Tremendous. Thank you.
Thank you.
All the feelings.
Thank you so
It was
much. Thank you.
incredible conversation.
I love that
Thank
poem,
you.
Gregg.
Thank you. I love
Yes.
always.
All right.
Incredible.
Both.
Thank you all.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
everybody.
much.